everyone, welcome to the November 2nd edition of the TimeformUS Pacecast. I'm David Aragon. I'll be joined very shortly by my co-host, Craig Milkowski. This week on the podcast, we're going to take a look at the upcoming Breeders' Cup races. We're going to go through them all, the 5 races on Friday, the 9 races on Saturday. We're recording this at about 4 o'clock Eastern on Monday, so right before the post-position draw takes place. That's supposed to happen at, I think, 5 o'clock Eastern. But I don't anticipate that the post-positions are going to change our opinions about most of the horses. I think we, at this point, have a pretty good sense of how the fields are going to shake up. So we'll mention that. Maybe we'll bring up the post position with relation to some horses that it might be important for in races where they're going 2 turns or races that are likely to have large fields. But for the most part, I think we'll give just our take on these races, the major contenders, and where we think things stand a few days out from the Breeders' Cup races. Before we get into the racing, though, I just want to say, Craig, it's so good to have you back. I know this wasn't planned for us to miss a few episodes, but I'm glad that things are going better with you and your family right now.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Definitely on the upswing here with my daughter who's been ill. So keep her in your thoughts and prayers if you're into that sort of thing, and I'd appreciate it because it certainly helped so far.
I'm glad that you got a little good news this week, and I hope things keep heading in the right direction. Let's dive right into the racing because we've got so much to cover, and we're going to begin with the Juvenile Turf Sprint. It's the first Breeders' Cup race that is planned on Friday, going the 5.5 furlongs, and this one, as is typically the case in these races, features a slew of Wesley Ward horses. He's got a very strong hand in here. A number of them would be major contenders if they all ran, but I think the one that he's going to run among those that would be shorter prices is Golden Pal, and based on his performance at Saratoga over the summer, he's way the horse to beat.
Yeah, it's quite the field, as you said, loaded with Wesley Ward horses and several strong ones. But obviously, I think Golden Pal is the one to start with. He's a horse that he has said is might be the best horse he's ever had. And I know we get into we hear a lot of trainers speak and stuff, but I think he means it when he says it, and nothing we've seen on the track would dissuade me from believing that. So I think he is clearly the horse to beat. I'm not going to pretend that I've handicapped this race in full. I think we have almost 20 horses listed in our PP, so I'm going to wait until after the draw. But this isn't a race where I'm real big on trying to take a shot against the favorite in this year's edition. I haven't looked too deep, as I said, to see how many horses we have shipping over from Europe. One of the things, I don't think there's the normal amount that we get, but one of the things I normally do is not like the Euros and these turf sprints, because for one, it's never let me down. They really haven't competed very well. And I just don't think turf sprinting is as strong over there. But we do have another Wesley Ward that's interesting in Campanelli, I think is maybe how you say it, who has won a couple of races overseas, but he's also he broke his maiden here at Gulfstream before winning at Ascot and Deauville. So he may very well be the horse to beat outside of Golden Pal, but just based on that European form, I'm not going to give it as much credit as a lot of people will.
Yeah, this is one of those races where there are a lot of cross entries between this race and the Juvenile Turf and Juvenile Fillies Turf. And Wesley Ward would have the top 3 choices in this race if he ran all those that were pre-entered. But it sounds like Golden Pal's running here. Campanelli, it sounds like she's likely running in the Juvenile Fillies Turf going a mile. And Outador, who would also take money if he went here, it sounds like he's probably running in the Juvenile Turf. So we'll see if those are actually where he runs these horses, but that's how the preferences were given to the Breeders' Cup last week when they did the pre-entries. So beyond Golden Pal, I think the other Wesley Ward horses that are pointing for this race don't quite stack up. You're left with a bunch of Euros. Like you, I'm not a big fan of the Euros in most of these races. We'll see which ones end up in here, but I think they're a cup below Golden Pal if he's the same Golden Pal that we saw over the summer. Let's move right on to the Juvenile Fillies Turf. This one going a mile for those the 2-year-old fillies. And I mentioned Campanelli, who would have been one of the favorites in the turf sprint. She's also likely to take money in this race as she stretches out from 6 furlongs to a mile for the first time. But I think the 2 horses that are the ones likely to garner the most support are the undefeated fillies from Kentucky and New York, Aunt Pearl for Brad Cox, who just won the Jessamine, and Plum Ali for Christophe Clement, who most recently won the Miss Grillo in New York. They seem like 2 exceptional exceptionally talented turf fillies. And the Europeans, while they have some credentials, they might have to step up to beat these two horses.
Yeah, I think for sure a lot of people just automatically gravitate to the Euros in this field, but the local horses, I use the term local very loosely, obviously, when referring to North American-based horses, have certainly had their share of success in these juvenile turf and juvenile turf fillies. So I'm not going to give any kind of special edge to the European horses in here. I don't really have any knocks on the American horses. I am a little leery of Aunt Pearl. I just am always leery of horses on turf who have only gone wire to wire when there's probably going to be plenty of pace in here. I know there's been a lot of talk about her time in the Jessamine, but there were a lot of circumstances that kind of led to those quick-looking fractions. They ran a much longer run-up than they've ever done before, and that probably eated to the final time figure as well. So, I mean, her figure's nothing special with a 99 last time. And of those two, I much prefer Plum Ali, who got a 108 winning the Miss Griot. We have the race coded in red as a fast-paced contest. And it's not like she came from way back. She was actually sitting up close to that pace and finished it off well. So for me, she's the horse to beat of those two.
Yeah, I think they're both very talented. We got a bit of a line on the relative merits of those two races in the Chelsea Flower at Belmont, which was run yesterday on Sunday. In that race, Ingracia was the winner, and Caldi, who was second to Aunt Pearl, I think she faded to be fourth in there. Now, there was an extremely soft turf course at Belmont, so maybe you just don't want to put a whole lot of stock in that form. It might have been totally different on a firm turf course, but that's just interesting that the horse coming out of the Jessamine ran much better than the horse coming out of the Miss Grillo. I think they're both very talented. Aunt Pearl has that win over the track. We'll see if there's other speed in this race, because obviously Aunt Pearl has never had a horse in front of her before. Campanelli, she could show speed stretching out from those sprint races. I don't really know about her pedigree for going longer. I haven't really dived in to that yet, but her form overseas is rock solid. She got a 114 time form rating for that win over Colts in the Pre-Morny. So she's definitely good enough to be a contender in here. It's just a question of the distance. And beyond those three, I think it's a gap back to the rest. A lot of the other Europeans that are entered in this race, they're just not quite the cream of the crop. I mean, Aidan O'Brien's got a few in here, the best of those being Mother Earth, who's coming out of a third place finish in the Group 1 Fillies Mile. There were some good fillies that she faced in there, but I mean, she was only third best, and her prior form is somewhat inconsistent. So I'm not quite the biggest fan of some of the other Europeans coming over for this race.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And with Campanelli, I was actually hoping to hear your take on her breeding, but I'll probably bug you about that later in the week if I haven't heard from you. But yeah, there's nothing on paper. I would definitely like her a lot more in this race than I would the sprint.
And sorry, I'm going a bit out of order here. I mixed up the juvenile fillies turf and the juvenile turf. A lot of these races are hard to keep track of. But let's now work on to the Breeders' Cup juvenile turf, which would be the race coming after the turf sprint in the order of things on Friday. This one seems like it's just totally wide open. There are plenty of Euros coming over. It seems like many of the European contenders are of a higher quality than the ones that we're seeing in the juvenile fillies turf. The Europeans do seem to have a slightly stronger hand coming into the race than the Americans, at least from my perspective. You've got Cadillac, who was one of the favorites coming into the Group 1 Dewhurst last time. He was a bit disappointing in there, but his prior victory in the juvenile stakes at Leopardstown was very impressive. I know he's highly regarded. You've got Battleground, the son of Breeders' Cup turf winner Found for Aidan O'Brien. He's been off for a little while, but I know that he turned some heads over the summer. You've got Silhouette, who was the very impressive winner of the Lagardère Group 1 race, Arc Week at Longchamp. He won that race by 8 lengths in heavy ground, so we have to see if he can transfer that form to an American-style course over firm ground. They all seem like they're quite talented, and the Americans, they all have to really step up and run faster.
Yeah, based on the figures, just looking down our preview page in the TimeformUS PPs, you see several hundred type figures, and they're all for the Euro shippers, other than I think After 5, who got 100 in his debut, but then regressed second time out, once second in the Futurity at Belmont. So yeah, this is a race where I will definitely favor the Euros. Which ones? I'm just not sure yet. Going to do a lot of replay watching in the last couple days leading up to Friday. Should have plenty of time for that. And I'll certainly be tweeting out some thoughts on those races as I see them. But when it comes to the North American contingent, and I say that because we have a couple from Woodbine as well, I believe, like Gretzky the Great, who won that summer stakes last time. But even him, his 96, which is the better figure, one of the better figures we've seen among the North American horses, just doesn't stack up very well with the time form ratings for those shipping in.
Yeah, from my perspective, I found this to be the most confusing race of the 5 races on Friday for the 2-year-olds. Just really no clear favorite, and I think it's one where you want to search for some value. I mean, one horse that I think you do have to have an opinion about is Muda Sabek, who won the prep for this at Keeneland, the Bourbon Stakes. Visually impressive in doing so. I think he was last at the quarter pole, past the entire field, but he got a pretty favorable pace setup that day, and the speed figure just came back so slow. That's not the kind of horse I'd want to take at a short price in a field like this.
Yeah, I think we're going to talk about several horses like that over the course of this podcast, particularly among the 2-year-olds. But yeah, I would have liked to definitely seen a better number than the 89 he ran that day, especially given the great setup that he got. Yeah, it's visually impressive and nice to see when a horse hesitates a little at the start and then they come flying wide and blow by everybody. But you could almost argue that little bit of a slow start might have helped them given the pace in here. So he's one at a short price I won't be using.
Let's move on to the 2 dirt races, beginning with the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies. This one is very interesting. We've got 3 undefeated fillies who will be facing off for the first time, one based in Kentucky, one from New York, and one from the West Coast. It feels like Princess Noor is coming in as the most accomplished in that she's been so visually impressive out in California and has really stamped herself as a horse that I think many people are just a fan of based on what she's done in her races. But to me, there's a real question as to what she's been beating out west, and the speed figures suggest that she's got the most improving to do of these 3 fillies.
Yeah, I would agree. Now, she's not one I would totally dismiss. I mean, she's been winning her races so easily, but I think when you look at these races, you just have to assess the resume against what kind of price you're going to get. And I mean, this is a horse who is likely to go off favored and maybe even heavily favored. So that's not the kind of bet I want to make when I'm looking to win a race like this and to make some money. I don't want a favorite who has to improve 6 or 7 lengths off what we've seen before. I guess there was some good news in that her workmate Spielberg actually came back and broke his maiden finally yesterday after a couple tries in some stakes races, and he's one that she's been able to basically outwork. But, I haven't done the figure yet for that. I'm not sure how strong it's going to come back, but it has that at least going for her. One thing I do want to mention, Princess Secret is out of this race. I guess there was a medication violation, so she's essentially barred from the race. So we're only going to have a field of 7 for this one. So it's going to make it a little bit of a tactical race without any traffic problems. And I think it's one where the best horse should be able to win. It's just a matter of which one that is. And as you mentioned, there's a couple other good ones in here. Day at the Office has done absolutely nothing wrong, has run a huge 112 speed figure, winning that Frizette last time. And it was a day where it was pretty easy to make speed figures. We had the other 2-year-old males that day. I think it was the Champagne Run, and she compared very favorably with that one. Simply Ravishing ran a big 109 at Keeneland. I'm not as big on that figure because she did it setting a pretty slow pace on a clear lead, but these are 2-year-olds. There's no reason to think she has to have the lead. Maybe she just inherited it that day. So out of the 3 big fillies, I would prefer the other 2 to Princess Noor, but honestly, none of them would surprise me in here.
Yeah, there is something I want to get your take on because with regard to Princess Noor, her speed figures are lower, but it's not just a phenomenon we see with her. As I kind of went through all of these Breeders' Cup races for the 2-year-olds, you notice that all of the horses coming from California just seem so much slower than the 2-year-olds that we've been seeing in New York and in Kentucky, not just in the stakes races, but even in the maiden races. Do you have a theory as to why the California 2-year-olds are just so significantly slower than the rest?
Well, to be honest, I'm not even sure it's just the 2-year-olds. I'm not sure that the racing in California is of the same standard that we've gotten used to over many years. I mean, there's no bigger fan of Southern California racing than me for years and years because I love the high speed. I love the fast times and the pace, the quick paces we often saw. But things have just changed. And obviously, there's some issues with the racing out there. And these horses had every chance to run big figures, specifically because the older horses have not been particularly good. So when they run on the same cards as them, had they run a time close to them, they would get better figures, but it's just not happening. So me personally, I'm going to bet that California racing this year is just not of the same quality that we're used to.
Yeah, that would be the logical conclusion to make, and I think it's going to get a test in some of these 2-year-old races because the horses coming in are just a little bit slower. And I agree with your take on the other two, Day Out of the Office and Simply Ravishing. Simply Ravishing's already answered the 2-turn question, but both of these fillies are already fast enough to win a race like this, so it's going to be a really interesting battle, and I'm fascinated to see how the public bets this race.
Yeah, any thoughts on the second turn for Day at the Office, which he hadn't tackled yet?
It's definitely a concern. The progeny of Into Mischief, I think, once they go a step past a mile, you start to have some questions about them. Obviously, there are exceptions to the rule. Authentic immediately comes to mind, having won the Kentucky Derby this year. But these Into Mischief seem so precocious and so good in the one-turn races, especially as 2-year-olds. You do wonder about it. She's a big, robust kind of filly, so maybe she can get it done. She's the fastest one coming in, so she could arguably regress a little bit and still be right there with the other two. So it's going to be a really good battle. I'll just want to see how they bet this race because to me coming in, I don't really have a strong favorite among them, and I'm going to let price be my guide.
Yeah, that's always a wise strategy. After all, it's a value game. Picking winners is nice, but picking good bets is better.
Moving on to the Breeders' Cup Juvenile for the males, going mile and 16th on the dirt. And this seems, to me at least, like one of the more straightforward races that we're going to see on Friday. Jackie's Warrior just looks like way the horse to beat. He's an exceptionally talented 2-year-old. He's been running fast speed figures really from the start in his debut. And his Hopeful and his Champagne just pretty much blew me away. The horse that he's beating in those races, Reinvestment Risk, he is no slouch, and he's certainly far from impossible in this race because he's running faster than all the rest, even though he's lost his last two. Jackie's Warrior does have to answer the 2-turn question, but he still looks pretty tough to beat.
Yeah, he does. I mean, he ran a 117 speed figure, which is good enough to win this race almost every year, if not every year. Just really impressive colt. There is a 2-turn question, but I certainly saw nothing in that Champagne that would make me think he couldn't get another 16th of a mile. And frankly, with a horse with high speed like him, who figures to be right up front, the second turn could actually help because that tends to cause some problems for the horses in behind with ground loss on an extra turn and things like that. So I have no real knocks on him. It's hard to see anything Reinvestment Risk could do to turn the tables. He tried them. He pushed them last time, got up close, and just was no match whatsoever. I guess the only other horse I would even consider is Sitting on Go. He looked good in that Iroquois at Churchill. Got a huge 107 speed figure. I use the term huge loosely. It was a big jump for him and a really strong effort for a 2-year-old in September, but it's still nothing near Jackie's Warrior. So I'm not sure I'll find any value in this race, and maybe just one I'll watch as a fan because I'm having a hard time coming up with an alternative.
Yeah, I'm a little perplexed by a lot of the racing media seeming to bill this race as a match race between Jackie's Warrior and Essential Quality. Now, Essential Quality is the other Grade 1 winner in this field, having won the local Breeders' Futurity at Keeneland, but he really would have to step forward in a big way to get on the level that Jackie's Warrior is. I mean, obviously he's gone the 2 turns already and he's undefeated. He has upside, but I'm kind of with you. I mean, it sounds like Sitting on Go could be a much bigger price than Essential Quality, and from my vantage point, they beat fields of similar quality last time.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Essential Quality is one of those he's got to take a big jump to match a horse like Jackie's Warrior, and I don't think he'll offer anywhere near the value that I would need to take a shot at that kind of leap.
All right, let's move on to the Saturday races. A lot to get through on Saturday. 9 Breeders' Cup races. We're going to begin with, I think, what is the 4th race on that card, the Filly and Mare Sprint. And this is another one with, it should be a really good battle between 2 exceptionally talented fillies, Serengeti Empress and Gamine. Serengeti Empress, I think, is going to be helped by some defections from this race because it sounds like Bellafina's been retired. Frank's Roquette, who's pre-entered here, it sounds pretty likely that her connections are going to run the Breeders' Cup Sprint instead. So looking at the pace projector for this race, that could leave Serengeti Empress with a much softer pace than she's gotten in her 2 prior starts.
Yeah, when we were talking about this race before, I was almost hoping Serengeti Empress would try the boys in 6 furlongs because I thought it would be an easier field. But the way this field is shaken out, it looks like she could be the speed of the speed in here. I mean, Gamine's obviously a very fast filly, but she's run nothing like we've seen from Serengeti Empress early, and we know Serengeti Empress's game as well, particularly in these sprint races when she's challenged. She fights it out to the wire. I know she got nipped by Bell's the One, but she was in a just massive speed duel with Bellafina that day, who you mentioned is not going to go in this race. So, it's very possible she could be on a lone easy lead. Now, I'm not saying she's going to set a slow pace because I don't even know if she's capable of doing that, but she just might be running free and clear and have things go her own way. And I think she's going to be really tough to run down. The other 3-year-old in here, Venetian Harbor, is to me similar to Gamine. She's probably not quite as good, but I've just seen nothing from her that indicates she could offer any kind of challenge. The pace projector shows the same thing. Challenge early, I should say. So I think Serengeti Empress is clearly the horse to beat, and I'm not sure she'll be the favorite. I suspect Gamine will be.
Yeah, I had somebody on Twitter ask a question about different types of speed figures that you'd use for these Breeders' Cup races, kind of depending on the circumstances. Also with the European runners, how you want to view them with their ratings. But this is a situation where I think paying attention to the TimeformUS speed figures with relation to Serengeti Empress really highlights how well she's run in her last couple of races. Because when you're looking at final time-based speed figures, Gamine has run significantly faster than Serengeti Empress in her one-turn races. But you really have to take into account the paces that Serengeti Empress set in the Ballerina, especially last time in that Derby City Distaff. I mean, the bump that she got from her 117 final time number in the Derby City up to the 130 TimeformUS speed figure that she got for her nose loss to Bell's the One in that race really highlights how fast that pace was. And to me, that last race is the best race Serengeti Empress has ever run. That race completely fell apart and she refused to give up in the late stages, really lost just a dirty head bob. She wanted to win that race so badly. And I have not seen Gamine overcome the kind of adversity that Serengeti Empress has. And I agree with you. Gamine could be the favorite in this race. There are some questions to me about her current form after she lost the Kentucky Oaks with really no excuse last time. And I just think Serengeti Empress is the horse that they all have to beat in this race.
Yeah, and I've always found her to be an interesting horse in that it's almost like they kind of had their hand force the connections after winning a race like the Kentucky Oaks, that they had to keep routing her. But if you could do like in Formulator, I think you can kind of narrow the PPs down to just sprints or even within a certain distance range. If you just look at this Philly sprints, I mean, it's incredible going back to her test last year where she wasn't able to beat Kofefi, but she still ran a huge 127 TimeformUS speed figure. I don't think there's any doubt that she is a much better sprinter than she is router. And I think it's a good spot for her. And she's the one that I'm going to try to make some money with, most likely.
Now, I know neither of us have made concrete picks for these races yet, with the post positions having not been drawn yet. We haven't seen the final fields. But one horse that I would look to play around with a little bit is Speech, who's turning back in distance. She seems like the kind of horse to me that could really benefit from a turn back. She's got that big win at Keeneland in the Ashland where she earned her best career speed figure beating Venetian Harbor. Just seemed like the Kentucky Oaks didn't really work out for her. And maybe she's the one that could take advantage of a hot pace in this race if they do go very quickly up front, because personally, I thought Bell's the One and everything go right last time. Come Dancing has seen better days. I'm not the biggest Venetian Harbor fan, and maybe Speech is one that could get a little lost on the board.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I actually talked with one of the owners of Speech and said, I love the placement here. Much better than the distaff. I like the turn back for her. She's going to get some pace, but I mean, she's going to need some pace, but I think that's something you're almost guaranteed with Serengeti Empress. And if somebody gets brave and actually tries to go out and fight with her, it could very well set this race up for a closer. And while I do agree with Bell's the one, got an absolutely perfect trip last time, I don't think it's out of the question that she could again. So she's another one I would consider using as well.
Moving on to the next race in the sequence, we arrive at the Breeders' Cup Turf Sprint, 5.5 furlongs, this Grade 1 event, and a lot's going to be determined by how the final field shakes out, because we've got a ton of horses on the also eligible list who will get into this race in order of the preference as determined by the Breeders' Cup Committee. We've got a few horses that could wind up in different races. It's hard to really know where to start because this one is just so wide open. The leaders of this division right now, I guess, are horses like Leinster, who's won his last two, and Imprimis, who has crossed the wire first in his last two, was disqualified out of one of those. We've got Alexandra coming off a long layoff after winning the Jaipur against the boys back in June. So many contenders and a lot of horses that may be pace dependent, and we're not really sure how much pace is going to be in this race when all is said and done.
Yeah, this is a race we have a ton of horses in our advanced PP, so it's kind of hard to get a handle on, and it's one I would definitely wouldn't want to try to even make a pick right now, but I do think post position is going to be important. It's almost sure to be a full field of, I assume it's 14 horses, and if so, you do not want to be a speed horse that draws outside in a field like this, because more often than not, you just get outrun going into that first turn, you lose a bunch of ground, and your race is over unless you just break like a shot. Because when you break far outside to make it over to the inside, you just have to outrun several horses by at least a few lengths, and that normally isn't going to happen in a race like this. But I would suspect there is going to be some pace in here, so it is going to come down to trips in a race like this. You've got plenty of good closers. You mentioned Imprimis, who's done nothing wrong this year other than getting DQ'd. Leinster, the mare, Alexandra. So this is going to be one wild race. And if there was one race on the card where I say I do need to see pace post positions, it would be this one for me.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. I'm not anywhere near making a pick in this race. I do want to see how it all shakes out. I mean, Alexandra's a horse that I'm a big fan of. She's one that I would definitely be interested in because she always comes with that strong late run. But you've got a lot of horses that could be prices in this race that are interesting. Just Might is going to be a long shot. He's in career form. Even a horse like Chaos Theory was a little compromised by pace last time in the Woodford at Keeneland. He's a horse that has been in great form this year. So a lot of runners that might fall through the cracks, and I'll want to see how this field comes up, and another race where I just want to look for some value.
Yeah, and I do have to ask about one horse, because if there's one horse I would say I'm against in here, and I hate to say it, it's because I'm a fan of the horse, it's Got Stormy. She's actually won her last two sprints, one at Kentucky Downs, one at Keeneland, and she's looked good doing it, but she just hasn't had the best speed figures, and I think it's more a thing that she just caught some pretty weak fields those days, much weaker than what she'll face here, but I'm willing to let you sway me if you can.
I don't really have a big knock on her. I mean, we can tear apart her last two races based on the competition because, as you said, they come against much weaker horses, and now she's stepping back up against males. But, I mean, she was facing horses that are arguably better than this earlier in the year. I mean, her second to Halliday and the 4-star Dave is maybe better performance than any of these have put forth in recent months. So she's got the class to be competitive here. It's just a question of whether she can do it at 5.5 furlongs. I'm a little skeptical about whether she'll be a bettable price. So that's one reason that I might lean against her here, but I'm not going to be shocked if she does well in this race. Let's move on to the Dirt Mile, which is another race that is really going to be affected by how the field shakes out, who ends up in this race. You've got a lot of pre-entries, but many horses that have first preference for different races than this. So we'll see who makes up the core field after the entries are actually drawn. A horse that we know is going in this race is Complexity, who I think would be one of the favorites in here, regardless of who shows up. He's coming off the best performance of his career when he won the Kelso last time. That was one turn, though, and really all of his wins have come around one turn. I think the only time he's ever tried two turns was in that Breeders' Cup Juvenile, where he just completely fell apart at the end of his 2-year-old season. So that's a big question for him, but it seems like he's just a different horse these days.
Yeah, he's a really good horse. Chad Brown's done a great job with him. I mean, he was a horse they had almost kind of forgotten about. He was away so long. He had a couple layoffs. He didn't run well before that last layoff, but he's looked like a new horse this year. I would even probably argue he might have been best in the Forgo when he got run down by Win, though it's really tough to say given the crazy conditions we had that day. But yeah, he's definitely one to beat for me. The horse that intrigues me the most in here is Knicks Go, who has just, since shifting barns to Brad Cox, has just run two monster races, one at Oaklawn, one at Keeneland. He's won by a combined almost 18 lengths on those two. He ran a huge 129 speed figure last time. And more important to me is he's done it both around two turns. He's a horse who was just running a ton. He was a runner-up in the juvenile a couple years ago. I can't even remember if that was the one with Complexity or not. It may very well have been. But he just seems like a new horse in the Brad Cox barn. And he's the one that I think could offer some value. If he runs anything near that 129 speed figure last time, he is definitely the one to beat for me. But that doesn't mean it's going to be easy. As you said, there's a whole bunch of horses in here, and it's really going to be interesting to see where they go. But I think he's the one that's definitely pointed here that sticks out to me.
Yeah, Knicks Go is definitely a dangerous horse, and we saw a couple of horses that finished behind him in that race at Keeneland come back at Churchill last weekend, and they didn't necessarily win, but they ran well enough to validate that speed figure that he got, so he's a major contender off that performance. I will just say he was allowed to set his own pace, going pretty slow up front in that allowance race. That's probably not going to happen in this Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile. He's going to have to run a lot faster early, so we'll see, because he's a horse that really has done his best running when he has the lead all to himself, and we don't know if he can do it when he's coming from off the pace, and there is other speed in here. So that's the one reason that I might be a little bit wary of him, especially if he's a short price in here. Another horse that I think I'd consider is Art Collector, who they tried to go longer distances in some of these top 3-year-old races, but I am not at all opposed to him turning back in distance. He was successful sprinting early in his career, so I think the mile distance is perfect for him. We know that he likes Keeneland. He's got speed figures that put him in the mix. He's got upside as a 3-year-old, so I think Art Collector makes plenty of sense in this race.
Yeah, he does. And the one other horse I want to mention is Sharp Samurai. He's a horse who I've liked on dirt. I liked him in the Pacific Classic, and I thought he ran well that day. And that was at 1.25 miles. And I actually think this mile distance is more to his liking. So if he shows up in this spot, he's likely to be a price and a horse I think is going to run well.
Let's head on to the Filly and Mare Turf. And this one, it's really the Americans versus the Europeans. The top American hope coming in, I would say, is Rushing Fall. Chad Brown has a strong hand in this race. He also has Sister Charlie, who was the favorite in this race last year when she was third. But Rushing Fall seems to have usurped her stablemate this year. She's coming off that impressive victory in the Diana, where she just got the better of Mean Mary, who's also likely to be in this race. And kind of looking through this field, I don't know how all of the Europeans are going to be ridden, but among the American contenders, doesn't seem like there's a ton of speed in this race, and there's a possibility that Mean Mary and Rushing Fall could dominate this race up front, just like they did in the Diana.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. It almost looks like it could be a rematch because I just don't see a lot of speed. Maybe that'll change when I go watch the replays of the European horses, but I tend to doubt it. Just glancing at the comments, it didn't look like it was loaded with speed. And I think these two are probably going to wind up being the horses to beat. It's just going to come down to price, and we'll see what the field's made out of. But I know we've been talking about Mean Mary all year. I thought she was really game that day. So, I mean, I certainly wouldn't dismiss her just because of that neck decision to Rushing Fall.
Yeah, and Rushing Fall is stretching out in this race to the longest distance she's ever tried. I know many feel that a mile might be her ideal distance, but they're opting for this race, obviously, instead of trying the boys in the mile. Maybe the extra 16th is going to work in Mean Mary's favor. I know that her connections really think that longer is better. They even pre-entered her in the Breeders' Cup Turf, even though she's likely to go in this filly and mare turf instead. So maybe that's the equalizer. For me, it's kind of a toss of the coin between these two horses, and it feels like Mean Mary's going to be the much better price. So I would lean towards her out of the horses coming out of the Diana. But I will say, last year, Sister Charlie looked like she had such an advantage over the other American horses coming in. And she got beaten by some Europeans that were maybe second tier runners. So you do wonder how the Americans will stack up against the Europeans that are coming over. And we've got some good horses in this race. Adira, who's coming out of a third place finish in the Prix de l'Opera. It seems like she's really found some excellent form out of nowhere recently, but she might be the now horse. Terabellum is a horse that showed some promise earlier in the year. She's had maybe a few excuses recently, but she's one that could easily get back into form and be good enough. So there are some Euros that I think you'll want to take a long look at in this race.
Yeah, and I would also say like a filly like Cayenne Pepper is just a 3-year-old. And while I do love the Timeform ratings, I personally tend to upgrade what they come over here as a little bit because I think they're a little light on our scale most times. So she's definitely one I'd give an upgrade, just based on that being a 3-year-old.
Next in the lineup on Saturday is the Breeders' Cup Sprint, going the 6 furlong distance on the dirt. And this one, kind of like the dirt mile, we'll see how the field ultimately shapes up. I did read this morning that Nashville is not going to run in this race. He's going to instead target the Perryville, which is run, I think, one of these days at Keeneland against a much weaker field. But they're going to take it slow with him after achieving those 2 impressive victories in his first couple of starts. And that's going to make the plan with Steve Asmussen's other horse, Yopan, much clearer because they can just try to send him to the front and run these off their feet. It won't be easy, though, because this is a pretty competitive field with plenty of fast horses.
Yeah, I don't think this is the strongest Breeders' Cup Sprint we're ever going to see for sure. The speed figure certainly would indicate that, where a horse like Yopan with just a 123 last time is as good as anybody else in the field, including Vekoma, who is coming out of winning the Met Mile last time, a race for older horses. So not the strongest field, but a good betting race. And I personally think Yopan's going to be very dangerous given the likely pace scenario that we see right now. He's shown to me that he's pretty game. He's able to take a little bit of a challenge early, and he's just a really fast horse who still has room to improve, which you can't say a lot about the others in here because they've been around so long and raced many times. And if he's any kind of price, I would certainly give him a shot. There are a couple others in here. CZ Rocket's kind of been winning the races out west, but we've talked about California racing. And for me, he was example 101, where he was a horse who was running at Keeneland. And granted, he won a decent allowance race there, but he was able to ship out west and win a pair of grade 2s. And to me, that's more of he just went out and beat up on weaker competition than he's any really great threat in this race. I know a lot of people really seem to like him, but for me, the speed figures are just too low, and I'm not a fan here. So Vekoma's the other one who adds that 123 Timeform US speed figure, but I'm going to have to watch some workouts on him, maybe see what kind of news I can dig up, because I just don't like this kind of layoff at all coming in. Curious what you think about that, but over 4 months off is pretty big for me.
Yeah, it's one of these races, the sprint, where you think you have to make that decision whether you want the now horses, some of the up-and-comers, or those that are part of the old guard in the sprint division. And to me, I kind of side with you where I think Yopan, he's running just as fast, if not faster than some horses who are more established in this division, and he still has that upside, so I think he's going to be dangerous. He could be the favorite in this race, so I mean, I don't want to talk up a horse that's going to be a short price in a competitive field, but he's not one that I would readily dismiss. I guess in that same category, you've got a horse like Frank's Rocket, who's a 3-year-old filly. She's won 4 in a row. Seems like she keeps getting better now into the fall of her 3-year-old season. They're taking a big swing here, running against the boys instead of running in the filly and mare sprint. I know that they feel 6 furlongs is a much better distance for her than 7 furlongs. Maybe she'll take some money because she's a filly facing the boys. I know that always creates some fans among these fillies that are stepping up in these races. But I think she's going to have to improve a little bit. How did you view her?
Yeah, I don't see her running very well in here. She's going to face a pace she hasn't seen before, most likely. And I just don't think she's as good as these. She's not going to be able to get the lead with a horse like Yopon in here. And, to me, she's been very fortunate. She's been spotted very well by Bill Mott until now. And just found tons of easy spots. I mean, you can just look at her odds in all those races. I think she was 2-5 3 times, or 2 times 1-5 once. So she basically did what she had to, or what she was expected to do. But speed figure wise, I'm against her. I think the best horse that she probably faced all year, she wound up losing to in Kamari, the one time that she was in a race that had red fraction. So I'm against her here. If she beats me, so be it.
Yeah, and I will just add, you mentioned Vekoma, and I pretty much agree with your take on him. He showed a ton of talent through the summer this year, but this was not a planned layoff coming into the Breeders' Cup. I mean, there was talk of him running in the Forgo at Saratoga, then he was listed as possible for the Vosburg, so there have been setbacks with this horse, and he obviously has some physical issues. Coming off long layoffs into graded stakes races is just not something that George Weaver really does. You can look up the stats in Formulator, and the sample's just so small. He's 0 for 6, I think, in graded stakes off 90-day layoffs or more, because he just doesn't do this. So I'm a little skeptical of Vekoma, even though he does have talent. He's going to be among the shorter prices in this race, and he might be one that I let beat me. One question that we got that I think is relevant in this race is how much stock you put in horses that have experience over a racetrack like Keeneland. We've got Diamond Oops coming out of that local prep in the Phoenix. CZ Rocket won here earlier in the year. Is that important to you, a horse that's handled Keeneland before? Because I know we typically see a lot of these horses that won the local prep take a lot of money wherever the Breeders' Cup is being held.
I mean, I won't say it's a factor I completely ignore, but I would put it pretty far down the list. When I handicap a race, I like to look at some primary stuff like current form, speed figures, of course, maybe trips, and then look at secondary stuff like how I think the pace is going to develop. And I say only secondary because that's something you're kind of guessing and you don't know if you're going to be right about it. So you don't want to put all your stock in that basket, but horse for course, I would say, is well below that, maybe like a third or fourth tier tiebreaker for me. Now, I will note when horses maybe don't like a track so much. We've seen examples of that in the past where some horses just won't run very well over a certain track and then they rebound. But I'm never going to assume that a horse has an edge just because another horse hasn't run over a track before.
All right, let's move into the late pick 4 sequence, covering the last 4 Breeders' Cup races, beginning with the Breeders' Cup Mile on the turf. And this is another one where you kind of have to weigh the relative merits of the Americans and the Europeans. I would say that the American horses coming into this mile are, from top to bottom, a deeper group than what we saw last year when the 2 fillies finished first and second in this race, Uni and Got Stormy, because you've got a lot of fast horses coming into this race, like Factor This, who's going to get a real class test, but has some of the best speed figures coming in, Halliday, who's got plenty of speed. We last saw him at Saratoga. Ivar, who has kind of come out from under the radar with a big win at Keeneland last time. He's might be the now horse in this race. And then you've got Uni, who won this late race last year, and can she repeat?
Yeah, this is one where I actually kind of favor the Americans, I think. I'm going to fill up Marcus Hirsch's Twitter direct message box, asking him a lot of questions about these horses, and especially as I watch the replays. But I think it's a strong group that's been running here. The figures kind of indicate that. We got a lot of figures in the upper 120s, so it's just going to come down to value and how much I think the Europeans are going to offer. But like you said, I do think there's some really strong American in here. Factor this, we've been talking about all year. We were wondering what distance would be good for him, but I don't think a mile is going to be any problem. He hasn't had much of a chance to run in it. He's been running longer distances, but I think he can handle it. And I prefer him a little bit to Halliday, who kind of got a nice easy trip. We haven't seen Halliday win when he's challenged early. We have seen that with Factor This, where he doesn't have to have the lead. And I don't think things are going to be as easy for Halliday as they've been in some other races this year. And Ivar, who you mentioned, I was really impressed with his last race. The way he just came flying from out of nowhere to kind of wear down that field and beat Raging Bull. He did it with a 126 speed figure. And more importantly to me, it wasn't a race with a crazy pace where we had red fractions in there and you would expect a big closer to come from near the back of the pack. And I just really liked his run in there and think he is a serious contender.
You mentioned Marcus Hirsch, and I should take this opportunity just to mention that I'm doing the DRF betting strategies package with him for the Breeders' Cup for the Friday and Saturday card. That'll also be part of the TimeformUS package that we do every year. I know, Craig, you'll be doing a piece for that as well. And the thing that I do with Marcus, it'll be a lot like the betting strategies that I do with Mike Beer at Belmont, and which I'll do a little bit later in the Aqueduct meet as well. So you can check out that and find more information about that on drf.com. But just to finish commenting on this mile, I think we see a lot of the Americans in a similar way. Factor This scares me. Ivar is a horse that I'm very interested in off that win in the Shadwell last time. You might remember, he's a horse that I've kind of been following pretty closely since he first came to this country. It took him a while to really figure out a running style or what was the right spot for him or how to ride him, but he clearly just has a ton of talent, and I think that's exposed now. And Uni, I don't really know what to do with. She hasn't run as fast this year as she did last year. I don't know if she's going to get the same pace situation that she got last year when things pretty much fell apart for her. And she might have a tougher group of Europeans to deal with this year because we've got a ton of horses with Group 1 form coming over. I mean, first and foremost on that list, I think, is Kamiko, who hasn't always won his races overseas, but I think he's run well every time that they've run him a mile. He had a big excuse in that Sussex Stakes at Goodwood back in July. You can watch that race on YouTube. He had a big trip in there, and he rebounded in that Group 2 last time. Looked great winning that over Ben Battle, who we remember from over the winter in Dubai as a really top-class racehorse when he's in form. So I think Kamiko's coming into this race in great form. And also One Master, who's, I think, won the last 3 editions of the Prix de la Forêt and on Arc Weekend. I mean, she always shows up. She was actually a close 5th in the Breeders' Cup Mile back in 2018. And a horse like Safe Voyage is in great form right now. So I think the European contingent in this race this year is pretty deep.
Yeah, no doubt about it. I think this could very well be the strongest card on the strongest race on both cards from top to bottom. It's just loaded with horses who can win, and I mean horses who would be worthy winners of a championship race. So this is one of the ones I'm really looking forward to, and it's definitely one of those Europe versus the US kind of matchups that is just really intriguing to see how the horses come together. And it's almost one where on the tight, England's kind of a tight turf course. I mean, I think trips are going to matter. Post position's going to matter a bit. So, you're going to have to break well on a course like this, which can be a thorn in the side of some of these European shippers. So I guess my slight lean would be to the American contingent because I do think it's a strong group, but it's just a really fun race that should offer plenty of value somewhere. I'm just not sure where it's going to be.
Now, one of the most highly anticipated horse-to-horse matchups that we're going to see over the 2 days takes place in the Distaff, where you've got Monomoy Girl, the 2018 winner of this race, who has just been in rock-solid form for the entirety of her career. She's very close to being undefeated in her 14 starts. And Swiss Skydiver is coming off that victory in the Preakness, just the most recent triumph in a campaign that's really been a throwback, where she just runs every 3 or 4 weeks, really doesn't duck any spots, and now she's going to be facing one of the best older fillies in the country in Monomoy Girl. It's going to be a real battle between these two, but there are other horses to consider in this race as well.
Yeah, this is another deep one. It's one of those, if you're a bettor, you almost wish you could just single Monomoy Girl and be done with it if you're playing horizontal bets, but I don't know if it's that easy. I have no knocks on Monomoy Girl. I mean, how could you? She's won all 3 races this year relatively easily. She's done it facing a variety of pace scenarios, and she's improved every time out on the speed figure scale. So I have no knocks whatsoever, but there are some really good horses in here. As you mentioned, Swiss Skydiver comes out of that Preakness with a speed figure of 128 last time, which is one that Monomoy Girls never achieved. Now, I'm not saying it'll be easy for Swiss Skydiver to match that. Maybe she'll regress a little bit, but she's certainly a horse who's a worthy competitor in here. And as you said, there's some others. Horologist is in rock solid form. She comes winning that Beldame last time. Kind of just backed up that form we've been talking about all year, where she's been in and out, but when she runs her races, she's just really good. And there's some others in here as well. Harvest Moon is good. She's on the improve. She's won, I believe, 4 races in a row. She beat Fighting Mad, who had been on a bit of a tear out west, and maybe something went wrong with that one as she's not entered in here for this one. I guess she's getting some time off. But of the West Coast divisions, I think that's one of the stronger ones, is this half division. So just a really tough race. And then we have Ollie's Candy, who somehow keeps finding a way not to win, or just keeps running up against bad pace scenarios. I don't want to say she finds a way not to win, as in she's doing something wrong. She just always seems to come up against a horse that runs a career best that day, but she certainly has the speed figures to win a race like this as well.
Yeah, Monomoy Girl is a fascinating horse in this race because she's going to be a very short price, obviously. I assume she's going to be favored even over Swiss Skydiver. And while she's been in some tough spots in her career, I don't think it's a stretch to say this is the toughest field that she's ever encountered, because this Breeders' Cup Distaff is much deeper than the one that she won back in 2018. So she might have to step up with the best effort of her lifetime to win this race, and she's going to be the favorite. So I'm not opposed to looking at some alternatives. Maybe Swiss Skydiver gets it done. I think if she runs back her Preakness, she could beat Monomoy Girl. It remains to be seen, because all of her victories haven't quite been on that level this year, but she's clearly in great form, and she hasn't really been deterred by that ambitious schedule. As you said, though, there are others to consider. I'm not going to be, I'm kind of a little bit of a fan of Ollie's Candy, just kind of how hard she tries in all of her races. I know she doesn't really win, but her speed figures stack up against the best of the rest, and I think she's a contender in this race. Even a horse like Cece, she could get a little lost in here, but I don't think she's totally impossible. She actually ran deceptively well in that Derby City Distaff last time, chasing Serengeti Empress. I know she kind of went off form over the summer, but I like what I've seen in some of her recent workouts, and I'm not going to be surprised if she bounces back. So I think there are a lot of fillies that could have a say in the outcome of this race.
Yeah, what's interesting about Cece, it's speed figure wise, she actually really kind of held her form. She just couldn't keep up with Fighting Mad, who was running off the charts for a couple races before that last time where she tanked. So, I'm not sure she ever went off form, to be honest. Just the finish position makes it look that way. And I'm totally with you in that last race at Churchill, that Derby City Distaff, where I think she ran much better than looks. And she actually got the same speed figure basically she's been running all year in a 120.
Let's move on to the penultimate Breeders' Cup race, the Breeders' Cup Turf. And we've got some excellent Europeans coming over for this race, topped, of course, by the admirable mare Magical, who came over for this in 2018, just barely lost to Enable. I forget what speed figure you gave her, Craig. I think she got a 113 buyer that day. The kind of number we don't really see on turf in this country. She is just excellent. The one maybe vulnerability that Magical has coming over here this year is that they have really kind of turned her into a 1.25 mile specialist in Europe over the past couple of seasons. She hasn't done the 1.5 mile that often. Maybe that doesn't mean anything, because often the horses that can go 1.25 miles in Europe can get 1.5 miles here. But maybe at a short price, that's one knock against her. She is the horse to beat in this race, though.
She is, and I only know this because I just looked it up while you were talking. She got a 131 for that race. When she was runner-up to Enable, Enable she actually got a 133. We actually have it knocked down a little bit because I think she's carrying a little more weight this time than she did that time. But yeah, she is clearly the horse to beat for me. I'm not too concerned about the distance. Like you said, I think she's been pointed to those 1.25 mile races For one reason, probably to avoid a Nabal a little bit, where she kept running into her and having trouble. But uh, yeah, she's a really special horse, and this is a race where 100% whoever I bet they will be coming from Europe, because I just don't think this is our strongest division. I mean, we have some decent horses in here. United, who was runner up last year in this race at a huge price, barely losing, if memory serves, is back, but I just don't think he's really a true grade one like he's going to face from some of these shippers.
Yeah, nothing against Bricks and Mortar, who won this race last year and completed just a sensational campaign. He was the horse of the year in the United States last year, but there are some tougher Euros in this year's edition. And I think the two most interesting runners that might be thorns in the side of Magical are, well, one of them is her stablemate Mogul, who bypassed a plan to start in the Arc last time, which he would have been one of the favorites in that race after winning the Grand Prix de Paris back in September. He was very impressive winning that race. I don't really know where that performance came from, other than the fact he's a 3-year-old who obviously is now hitting his best stride. But that form really held up well in the Arc. In Swoop, who was second to Mogul in there, he was runner-up in the Arc. And I think Gold Trip, who was third in the Grand Prix de Paris, he came back and was fourth in the Arc. So Mogul might be a horse that's coming into this race in great form. And also another filly, Tarnawa, who's just undefeated this year as a 4-year-old. She's coming off 2 straight Group 1 victories in France. She's also could be a dangerous horse for Magical to deal with.
Yeah, I have no problem with either of those two for sure. Mogul, as you mentioned, he's just a 3-year-old. Maybe that's part of what I mentioned earlier, where I don't take the Timeform ratings too literally, because he's a 3-year-old. I would expect he could still improve a little bit. And I'd even say the same thing for Tarnawa, the other filly that you mentioned. She's a 4-year-old, but her Timeform ratings are very good. They're not quite up to Magical's level, but she could still be getting better. This is hardly a knock on Magical, but I think at this point we know what Magical is. She's a horse who on her best day is going to run about a 130 Timeform rating, and I don't think it's out of the question that the two you mentioned could get there. I do think it's out of the question that an American horse could do that, barring just something crazy happening.
Well, I do want to ask about one American horse in particular, and that's Channel Maker. I know United might be the most heavily supported in the wagering of the American horses based on his performance in this race last year, but I think Channel Maker is the most interesting American horse in this race because you know what the game plan's going to be. He's going to be probably on the front end here. He's got that early speed, and he's got 2 gigantic speed figures in his last couple of races. Maybe it was just circumstances that allowed him to run those, but how do you view him possibly translating those excellent speed figures to Keeneland?
He's a horse that I'm going to be interested in. I'm going to wait and see the draw, see what the pace projector looks like. Because that last race, I'll be honest, it shocked me. I thought he was a bet against at 5-2. Most of his big races had come on courses with a lot of give in them, as it had in the Sword Dancer. His firm turf course races of late had not been very had not been very good, but then the Hirsch came. The course was undoubtedly firm on that scale we use, the 1 to 10 scale. It got a 9. So it was definitely a firm course, and he matched that same figure. So who knows? Maybe he's just figured it out. Maybe they actually figured out this is a horse that you just have to put on the lead for him to run his best race. We don't often see that with him until recently. So if he's shown on the pace projector as a horse that can get a clear lead, I'm not going to dismiss him at all.
Let's close things out with the highlight of the weekend, the final race on Saturday. It's the Breeders' Cup Classic, and this has drawn quite a field. The older horses are maybe not the most convincing group, but they're all in attendance here, the top horses, and you've got a very intriguing class of 3-year-olds that are stepping up. Many contenders. It's really hard to know how the public's even going to approach this race because so many of these horses look evenly matched. I guess we can start with the Bob Baffert trio because he has a very strong hand in here. He's got the 3-year-old Authentic and the 2 older horses that are coming out of the Awesome again, Improbable and Maximum Security. How do you kind of sort these horses in a hierarchy just in the Baffert stable?
Well, if I had to sort those 3, I would probably start with Improbable. I think he's been the most impressive horse this year. He's 3 for 4, I believe, and the one loss was the Tom's Day tie at Oaklawn, where he very well may have been best that day. He had a really wide trip, kind of made an early move and got run down late by Tom's d'Etat, but he's done absolutely nothing wrong. He's been versatile. He sat off a slow pace in the Whitney, just off, and was able to win that race easily. And then last time in the Awesome again, when things got real hot up front, he dropped back to last, albeit in the small 5-horse field. But he was clearly last, and he was able to swoop the field and win even more easily than he did in the Whitney. So out of those three, he would be the one for me. Next, I would probably go with Authentic. He's gotten some big figures from us his last 2 times out when winning the Derby and runner-up in the Preakness. No real knocks on him other than he seems to be a horse who needs the lead to win. Not sure how easy that's going to be here. Not saying he can't get the lead, but if he does, he's going to have to fight for it and go pretty quick. And then third, I would rank, believe it or not, Maximum Security. I just haven't been a fan of his this year. I mean, he's ran okay, but I expected to see more forward move from him, particularly in that last time when he was challenged and just wasn't able to win. I mean, no real knock. He ran a 127 speed figure, which was his best of the year, but he was a horse who had hit 130 last year or close to it. So as a 4-year-old, I would have expected him to be running better. We all know the story with him coming out of the Jason Service barn, and maybe he has every legit reason not to improve because we don't know how legit those speed figures were last year. But of those three, I would put him last.
Yeah, I think we've got a similar take on these Baffert horses. I may be a little more forgiving of Maximum Security than you are. I still wouldn't quite rank him on par with Improbable because he was soundly beaten by that rival last time. I do think he had the tougher trip, though, in the Awesome again, kind of in the teeth of that fast pace, and Improbable benefited from just having the versatility to sit as far off as he did and make that swooping move. Still, though, Maximum Security was not facing the best horses in this handicap division over the summer at Del Mar, and maybe he just hasn't taken that step forward, something that you've been saying really since the start of the year. So he's got arguably the most questions to answer out of all of these, but I don't think it's just about the Baffert horses. I mean, you've got Tiz the Law, who I know is coming off a bit of a layoff in this race, having not raced since the Kentucky Derby. But I'm not going to be shocked if he turns the tables on Authentic. And arguably, if he does that, he could be in position to win this race because it's not clear that the older horses are necessarily faster than the 3-year-olds.
No, Tiz the Law is the horse. If you force me to make a pick today on Monday afternoon, he'd be the horse I like in here. He's done absolutely nothing wrong so far, in my opinion. His second in the Derby was a very good race. It was probably every bit as good as his Travers and definitely better than the Belmont. He just ran into a horse who got a better trip that day, which isn't a surprise in a big field when you draw the 14 post out of 15. So it wouldn't surprise me at all if he turned the tables on Authentic, and his speed figures say he's good enough to beat a horse like Improbable on his best day. And granted, that 130 came almost 2 months ago, so he could even be a little quicker as a 3-year-old. So he's a horse I actually do really like in here quite a bit. The other horse I'm leaning toward actually playing is Tacitus. No, I'm just kidding. I had to say it.
You got me there, Craig. Yeah, I completely agree about Tiz the Law. He just makes a ton of sense in this race, and I am a fan of this horse. I am not going to be at all surprised when he runs very well and when he wins this race. But the horse that I'm leaning towards picking in here is Tom's d'Etat, and I kind of feel like Tom's d'Etat is the forgotten horse in this race. He's coming off a layoff, but that's never bothered him in the past. He's come off layoffs and put forth gigantic efforts going back the past few seasons. And let's not forget, I mean, he probably could have won the Whitney if not for blowing the start. I mean, go back and watch that race if you kind of have forgotten how badly he compromised himself by not coming out of the gate that day. And it's not like he's some horse that's had a ton of gate issues in the past. That kind of was just a fluky thing that he did in the Whitney, and that pretty much handed Improbable the victory that day. I thought Tom's d'Etat ran a huge race to be third in there because nobody else came from the back of the pack. The pace was crawling, and I firmly believe Tom's d'Etat would have beaten Improbable in that Whitney had he gotten the clean start. And he was in great form prior to that. I know he hasn't really done the 1.25 miles, but he's a kind of horse that I don't think is going to have any trouble handling it. And there could be a situation where he's the 4th or 5th choice in this race, and I just think that's excellent value on a horse that's good enough to win.
Yeah, I've got no knocks on him. As you said, that was also a really slow pace in the Whitney. I mentioned that with Improbable, and he was the only horse making up ground. He kind of blew the doors off Code of Honor, who was ahead of him, and is a horse many people wouldn't have expected that from. So no knocks. My only hesitation is the layoff. He's a horse who was seemingly pointed to every big money race on every continent in the world this year and showed up for very few of them. So I'm just curious if he had some issues, and he did have that gait problem last time. But he may very well be the forgotten horse and go off at a good price in here. Do you know what the layoff is all about? Was that by design, or is it just something that they just kept pulling the plug on racing and waiting for the next one?
I don't know all of the details, but I do believe this one was mostly by design. I didn't see him as listed as a probable starter in any of the final preps at any point. And I know that they're confident he does well off layoffs because of issues he's had in the past. He's had to come off many layoffs in his career. And I know that Al Stahl feels very comfortable training him up to a race. So I think it's been the plan with this horse. And we'll see what happens. I mean, obviously, his campaign has been abbreviated this year, but I just think based on raw talent, he's right up there with the best, if not the best of them. Well, that's all of the Breeders' Cup racing, and this is going to be our only podcast this week because things are going to get much busier later in the week, so we're not going to do an additional podcast after the post positions are drawn. But as we said at the top, I don't think that's going to change too many of our opinions, and you can find more information about who I like and who Craig likes in that DRF Betting Strategies package, or even just on Twitter. We'll be putting out a lot of our opinions throughout the week, and especially on those race days on Friday and Saturday. So look for all of that later on, and Craig, I'm going to cross my fingers and put all my good thoughts in your direction. Hope things continue to go well. And if that's the case, we'll be back next Tuesday to do a recap of these races, looking back at the Breeders' Cup in retrospect.
Yeah, I appreciate it. We're probably going to have to map out a little extra time with all these races. I'm sure we'll just cover the Breeders' Cup. But thanks for the good words. I'm glad to be back, and let's hope it stays that way.
Remember, you can always listen to us on DRF.com, Spotify, iTunes, YouTube, and SoundCloud. Wherever you get your podcast, just make sure to subscribe to the Daily Racing Forum channel. Thanks for listening this week, and we'll be back with our Breeders' Cup recap next Tuesday.